Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. WTF is Dirty Bomb? It was previously known by its name Extraction, which is incredibly generic. Before that, it was known as Dirty Bomb. Don't really know why they changed it, but they changed it back, so I guess we're sticking to that. I don't know, maybe some people got offended by it, which is frankly no excuse, but whatever. This is a free-to-play, class-based first-person shooter by Splash Damage, the developers of Enemy Territory Quake Wars, Wolfenstein Enemy Territory, and of course Brink, which I will defend to the death. Like the only person that will, but a lot of people didn't like Brink, and Brink was actually a pretty bad commercial and critical failure, unfortunately. Oh dear. But, thankfully, it did not kill the studio, and I'm glad, because these guys make objective-based first-person shooters in a way that most companies do not. They love multi-stage objectives, and I am a huge fan of multi-stage objectives, because they lead to some very interesting situations, some really cool team play, and also very large maps. In order to actually have multi-stage objectives, you need to have a map large enough to support it, because what's going to happen is teams are going to have spawn points which move through the map. So after one objective, you're going to be fighting in an entirely different part of the map, and everything's going to have moved forward. It's almost like moving onto a brand new map itself. So that's not something that most studios actually attempt, and Splash Damage, in my opinion, is actually pretty good at it. The question is, did they manage to pull it off with Dirty Bomb? Now, this game is currently in open beta on Steam. The thing is, it's got a cash shop, and as far as I'm concerned, at this point, once you have a cash shop, you are open to critique. I think that is fair, right? That seems reasonable. I certainly hope so. I got a chance to play this game a long time ago at PAX. I think it was actually 2 years ago, in fact. And now I'm getting a chance to play it in a mostly complete form. They're still testing features, adding in new classes and all sorts of things like that. But this game is, for all intents and purposes, working as the final version would. So I think that it is suitable to critique. So you're seeing gameplay in the background here that I recorded previously. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a bunch of gameplay, explain the game, and then I'm going to go on to business model, because for some reason, people don't like 15 minutes of business model discussion at the start of a video. I can't imagine why that would be. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just a horribly boring person. But let's have a look at the gameplay here. So what you've got is, as I mentioned, a class-based first-person shooter that is attacker and defender focused, which means that as the attacking team, you have to complete a series of objectives in order to win the level, and the defending team must stop you from doing so before the timer runs out. Now, you can also play this game in stopwatch mode, which is a little bit similar to the way that Left 4 Dead used to do its versus mode, where you change sides and then you have to try and beat the other guy's time. So you can play that, or you can play objective mode, which is just attack defense, where you're stuck on either the attacking or defending team for the entire duration of that map. Now, in terms of maps, there are currently 5 available in the game. It doesn't sound like a lot, but as I mentioned earlier, these maps are enormous, simply because they have to incorporate a lot of movement and changing of spawn points. A great example, of course, is the maps that contain the EV vehicle. And what that does is it will move through the level when people are close to it. So it's kind of like payload. And you can also jump on a turret in the EV itself, and you can also disable it, which you have to do as the defenders. So as this thing is moving through the level, it's changing the places in which you fight, and once it reaches its objective, it's going to unlock a new part of the map. So these maps are enormous, and they're essentially, in many cases, 3 maps in one. There are also a number of different routes that can be unlocked by blowing up or repairing various objectives. And as a result, what you've got are some pretty unique scenarios, and these maps which have a great deal of variety on them. Admittedly, the game itself doesn't have a lot of map variety in and of itself. Now, this is both the case in terms of the number of maps available and in terms of the terrain that you're going to be fighting in, because this entire game is based in a post-nuclear Fallout London. So you're going to be seeing some futuristic but nonetheless familiar locations from London. So you're going to see streets, you're going to see train yards, train stations, subways, and so on and so forth. So if you're looking for, say, a forest level, well, you're not going to have one, because, hey, it's in the middle of bloody London. There aren't all that many trees. Maybe they'll have one in somewhere like Hyde Park at some point, but as it stands, that is certainly not the case. Now, what you can do is you can jump into the game with 3 classes equipped, and you can switch between them whenever you like. So if you wish to drag in a medic, an objective specialist, and someone that just shoots a lot, well, I tend to do that. I generally think that's a pretty good idea, so as a result, that's exactly what I'm doing. That gives me a little bit of flexibility, although what I will say is that not all classes are necessarily suitable for each level. Absolutely, you can go in and just kill people, no doubt about that, but there are certain classes like, say, Nader, who is much better on levels that have a lot of indoor corridors, because her grenade launcher is much, much better there. If you're dealing with an EV map, then you're probably going to want to pick either Arty or Skyhammer, because they have the ability to rain down artillery and bombing runs, which are very effective at disabling the EV, as well as clearing out large groups of people on the outside. But they're not so good on levels which are focused on indoor combat, because of course airstrikes don't work indoors. So it is possible that you end up with classes in your setup that aren't necessarily ideal for the map that you're going into. But regardless, all classes can pretty much do the same thing. Hell, you can even revive if you're not a medic. It just takes quite a while to do that, and it's generally not worth doing because it's very risky, and you could be spending that time playing an objective or doing something else. As per most objective-focused FPS, though, not dying, or at least keeping people alive, is pretty key to success. The respawn is done in waves, so there are times when you'll respawn very quickly, but the waves are timed out, so everyone will spawn together, and that can mean that if a team gets wiped out very quickly, they're going to have to wait till they respawn, which means their objectives are probably getting taken at that point. So you want to avoid that. You want to get people back on their feet, if possible, if you can do it without risking it, and of course having medics to do that is absolutely key to success. Outside of that, there are three main class archetypes, I suppose, that the game has. The medic being one of them, the objective specialist being another. With the objective specialist, you can either place C4, repair a vehicle, or indeed defuse a lot faster than regular classes can. So you're pretty useful in that regard, and there's a wide variety of classes that have that ability. So there's a very fast class, like, say, Proxy, for instance. She is a shotgun class. She's one of the fastest moving classes in the game, and she can also drop proximity mines, and she can place and defuse C4 very, very quickly. In comparison to that, you've got Bushwhacker, who is a slower mover, but he can place a turret, which means that he is more of a defensive class as opposed to an offensive class. And then last but by no means least, you've got guys who basically are just out to kill people, and they don't have any special abilities, but they generally have the most powerful primary weapons as well as some of the flashiest specials. And some classes have up to 2 specials. Some classes are very basic in the abilities they've got, like, say, drop a proximity mine. I mean, that's really all Proxy can do as a special. But then you've got people like Skyhammer, who can throw down airstrikes. You've got someone like, say, Kira, who can direct an orbital laser around the place. And those abilities are balanced generally based on cooldown. You can throw down a lot more mines more often than you can call in things like artillery and orbital laser strikes, because otherwise, of course, it would be absolutely ridiculous. And having a combination and a mix of all of those different class archetypes is generally key to success. Although I have seen teams, say, full of proxies win, because, hey, if you've got 3 or 4 people that are all doing objective running at the same time, and you happen to catch the enemy team off guard, shotgun them down, then put the objectives home, then yeah, you can win very easily. So as long as you've got a reasonable mix, then you're generally going to be okay. So the question is, I suppose, how does it actually play? Well, the first notable thing to point out is that this is not really one of those aim-down sight shooters. Now, you do have the ability to aim down sights if you wish, but I generally don't, and the reason is that your gun is just as accurate outside of aim-down sights as it is with aim-down sights enabled. But aim down sights gives you some zoom, so of course if you're playing a sniper class, you're probably going to want to use that. For the most part though, I generally just shoot without using the sight. I find it much, much easier for the most part, and if I'm burst firing properly, I can generally kill people pretty quickly. Now, when it comes to time to kill, this game is a little bit more bullet spongy than most modern FPS. You don't die anywhere near as quickly, although things like a shotgun at point-blank range or a heavy attack with a melee weapon are going to drain your health very, very rapidly indeed. But in long-range combat, you can take quite a lot of hits, including multiple headshots with some weapons depending on how many HP you have. And there's a big variance in HP depending on what class you're playing. The bigger, heavier classes with the larger hitboxes and the slower movement, they've got a lot more hit points than the nippier, more agile people like Proxy, who generally don't have a lot of hit points at all, but they're very fast, so they can be dodging bullets, and they have very powerful close-range weapons as well to offset that disadvantage. The time to kill reminds me a little bit of, say, Counter-Strike, but with a little more margin for error in there. So you can take a few more bullets than you can in CS, but of course it really depends on where you get hit. If you get hit in the head, your health is going down like a rock, and you can die very, very quickly, but you can take quite a few body and leg shots without too much of a problem. And of course you have things like health kits and the health stations with the healing auras and so on and so forth, which can help you. And you do have health that does regenerate, but it's very slow to regenerate. It takes a while to kick in, so you're not going to be hiding behind a wall and getting all your HP back in a couple of seconds. That's not going to happen. It's going to take you a long time to get all your health back, so medics become much more vital in that regard. The gunplay I actually find to be pretty pleasant. In fact, I think it's an upgrade over Brink. A lot of people complained about the gunplay in Brink, again, the bullet spongy nature of the guns. I think that this game really rewards accuracy a great deal, and it helps that a lot of the classes move pretty fast. I mean, you are encouraged to jump around. You can rebound off walls, for instance. It doesn't have the full parkour system that Brink had, but you do have the ability to jump at a wall and then jump again, and in some cases you can jump a third time to sort of bounce around the place, and especially playing as a faster moving class or something with a closer range weapon, you're going to benefit a great deal from bunny hopping around, kind of arcade style. It straddles the line, I think, between something like Counter-Strike and something like, say, Quake. You know, it's kind of slap bang in the middle there. It rewards accuracy and headshots at long distance, but simultaneously you can get in close, jump around and evade shots and circle strafe, and you will be rewarded for that. Your gun accuracy will not go to hell just because you're jumping in the air. So it does find this interesting middle ground, which I personally think is quite nice and reminds me of things like Quake Wars and Wolfenstein Enemy Territory quite a bit. You know, it's really the splash damage signature style of doing things, which personally I'm okay with. I know some people are going to absolutely despise it, but it took me a little while to get used to it. I personally, when I started playing, I found that some guns were just useless, and I was aiming down sights with things like the Medic's SMG. I was like, well, this is useless. I can't kill anybody. And then I realized, actually, you're not really supposed to play that way. You're supposed to fire from the hip and burst in, say, 3 to 4 round bursts, and you'll actually find that this thing is pretty damn capable, especially if you get nice and close. Shotguns can two-shot people quite easily, and of course, sniper rifles are very effective, but at long range, things like the burst fire rifle, you can mow people down if you happen to be accurate enough. And in my case, I don't even use aim down sights to do that. I find that just clicking on that tiny little speck in the distance is very, very effective for the most part if you learn how to actually aim. So it does reward skill, and there is a big skill ceiling to be found in this game, whether it be through the use of the different abilities and the various techniques and mastering the movement system, or just being a good shot. Now, there's a big difference. I see people playing it like Call of Duty. They're fairly, like, close or medium range, and then they start aiming down sights and trying to strafe, and they can't hit anything. They're holding the button down, just spraying, and nothing's happening, because it isn't Call of Duty. You know, you have to burst a little bit, and it is a little bit more arcadey, a little bit more like Quake, although it's certainly not Quake 3 Arena by any stretch. You know, it's sort of sitting in a class of its own, straddling that line between the realism and the arcade arena shooter style affair. Now, I think where the game really excels, and this is probably what's going to get your attention when it comes to playing it, is the objective-focused gameplay. Splash Damage has been very good at that for a long time, and Dirty Bomb is no exception to that. You have these multi-stage objectives which move you through very large maps, and the map design, in my opinion, is really, really nice. You've got multiple avenues of attack, you have a certain degree of verticality, though not a crazy amount, and it supports a lot of different styles of play. Now, if you don't want to be out in the open field, there are generally tunnels and little buildings that you can get inside in order to engage in more close quarters combat. Alternatively, if you want to snipe, there's plenty of places to get a little bit of a height advantage and start picking people off that way. And when it comes to objectives, you're going to be moving from one to another. You may have one, say, like the train yard, where first you have to blow open the gates to the train yard, you then have to go in and blow up the blocker carriage, and then you have to take 2 data cores to a helicopter, which is in a central area, deploy those, and then you will be able to win the map. And of course, the defending team is going to try to stop you at every single turn. The cool thing is, every time you complete an objective, it's almost like moving onto a different map entirely. Your spawn's going to move, their spawn's going to move, and those places you were fighting in previously, you're not going to be there anymore. Like, you have no reason to be there anymore. So these maps are large and they're lengthy. So most of the map at most of the time is not actually used, and the way that they keep the combat focused in one particular area is a combination of the spawn points and the way that the objective is placed. And I find that it works pretty well. What I will say is that I would like to see a greater variety in objectives. Currently, you are sitting on 2 maps that have the EV, which is a vehicle which moves through the map, assuming that it's been repaired and you have people close by, so it's a bit of a payload-style affair. And then you've got a bunch of maps which are blow up this, then blow up this, then blow up this. I think there's plenty of room for variety there. I think what would be cool is, say, a map like the bank heist in Wolfenstein Enemy Territory, where you have to get into the bank having blown the doors off and steal the gold and take it away. I think there's all sorts of different possibilities, and I think that that would be nice going forward. It's not that I don't enjoy these maps, I do. I mean, I'm also the sort of person that would play DE Dust 2 until the end of time. But simultaneously, if you want to keep people playing long-term, map and objective variety is vitally important. So a little bit more than just blow up this, blow up that would be great. The maps do also feature optional side objectives, which will allow you to do things like unlock paths or create obstacles for your opponent. Great example is in the underground map, you can blow up something which will raise the barriers, which will slow down the defending team's ability to actually get to the front lines. It means the only way that they can move is either via a lengthy side passage or running up this sort of yellow tubing, which they can actually lose their balance and fall off. So it can become a little bit more difficult. It also tunnels them into a choke point, which means it's a lot easier to pick them off. So there are these little side objectives, and you can unlock tunnels by like enabling pumps to pump the poisonous gas out of various places, opening barriers and all that sort of thing. So that means that the objective specialists always have things to do, and there are these little side objectives to fight over as opposed to just the main objective as well. And it really does work very, very well, and it ends up being a very team-focused affair, and a successful defense or attack, particularly when it comes right down to the wire, is one of the most exhilarating things that I have found in FPS. I think it's the same reason that people love Counter-Strike, because that can go down to the wire. This game can go down to the wire very, very frequently, although there are also times, unfortunately, where it just ends up being an absolute stomp one way or the other, because the team got a huge amount of momentum and the opposing team just wasn't very good at defending or whatever. And it's also possible that the defending team is just so strong that you can't even take the first objective. It happens. It absolutely can happen, I'm afraid. But the game does have ranked servers, so if you are looking to maybe get a more challenging and perhaps more team-orientated experience, you can jump onto those servers and start to gain rank, and hopefully that will help you out in that regard. The game does have dedicated servers as well as a server browser. It is very much quintessentially a PC game, so you do have the choice of moving on to certain servers if you so desire, and I imagine they're going to allow you to rent private servers at some point, although that's currently not a feature that is available within the game. I think they'll want to do that because they're currently pushing the competitive side of the game, and there are actually tournaments going on for this title, so having things like clan practice servers and tournament servers are probably going to be fairly high up the priority list. Now, so far so good, but the game is certainly not perfect, there's no doubt about that. The first complaint that I've got is that graphically it's really not all that much to write home about. When I first played Brink, I was very impressed by the graphical fidelity of the game. Extraction, which comes out several years afterwards, seems to be something of a downgrade. I mean, it uses the Unreal Engine 3. It looks okay, and I do like some of the backgrounds, for instance, and I think it's probably just because I'm biased. I mean, I'm English, so as a result, seeing things like futuristic bombed-out London to me is really cool, and there's a nice splash of color every once in a while, but maps are, for the most part, kind of brown and gray, and as a result, they do end up being a little bit dull. It doesn't help that they're all urban, so you don't really get the kind of variety that you'd see in a game like, say, Battlefield, where you got your desert maps and your tundra maps and your forest maps and all sorts of things like that. You don't get that level of variety, so you're going to be seeing the same sort of grey bombed-out buildings over and over and over again. It's not like the map design isn't good. I think that the map design is very good. The problem is the aesthetic, I think, is going to grind on people after a while. it doesn't really help the cause that the weapons you're using are also very familiar as well. There are occasional cool things like, say, the revive gun, which obviously looks very futuristic, and the minigun, but otherwise you're going to be using current weapons like AK-47s, MP5s, M16s, and so on and so forth. They are part of that arsenal, so outside of the little splash of color, like, say, the cricket bat being part of the melee arsenal, you're gonna be playing with the same sort of guns that you're familiar with. It's not like the guns don't feel good. I think, personally, they feel great. They've got a decent amount of recoil on them, although not excessively so, and they do reward accuracy quite a lot. And you combine that with the lengthy time to kill, and you've got what, in my opinion, is a fairly skillful shooter. But I think there was an opportunity to maybe take the weapons to the next level and create some interesting stuff, and for the most part the game sort of fails to do that and stays a little bit too safe when it comes to its arsenal. We may see that diversified later down the line, but right now it's playing it safe with a bunch of staples from modern era weaponry. It can be quite hard to stomach that, considering that even genre leaders like Call of Duty have completely gone off the rails in many ways with things like laser shotguns and rail guns and dual wrist-mounted chain guns and all that sort of thing. So seeing a game these days that is still touting the same AK-47, M16 sort of dynamic is maybe a little bit surprising and can be somewhat off-putting for those looking for something more original. Personally, I'm able to look past that because there aren't that many games with this multi-objective focused gameplay, and I really enjoy that. So I'm able to just look past the fact that the guns aren't all that cool, but it would be nice to see some more variety later down the line. Now, performance-wise, the game seems to run really, really well 99% of the time. Like, it's capping out 144 frames per second, and it's running really, really smoothly. But every now and again, I have noticed some very minor frame drops, just a tiny little bit of hitching. It's very, very minor. Like, it's nowhere near Arkham level or anything like that. But it is there, and that's not the sort of thing you ever want in a competitive shooter, because a hitch in the middle of a fight can, of course, result in you missing your target, which is absolutely not what you want. So hopefully they're able to even that out just a little bit. It could, of course, just be on my configuration, but I experienced it on 2 different sets of graphics cards, so it may be that that's also happening for other people as well. It's not a huge problem. It doesn't happen that often, but I do notice it when it does. I think it's just because it compares to what is otherwise an extremely smooth experience, so if there is a little bit of a hitch, it's very noticeable because the rest of the gameplay was that damn smooth. Perhaps the game's weakness really is just its presentation. I talked a little bit earlier about how drab some of the maps are, but the graphical fidelity of the game is not exactly impressive in 2015. It's functional, it does the job, but it's not going to blow anybody's minds. I will say that animation quality is quite good, and there are some nice little details. For instance, if you're playing Fragger and you're tossing a grenade, he'll actually count on his fingers as to how long it has been since he's pulled the pin, which is neat. I mean, not only does that give you gameplay feedback, it's useful information, but it's also just a little bit of stylistic flair, and I do like that quite a bit. The voice acting's not too bad, although I will say that I don't think the gun sounds are particularly bombastic. In many ways, they're quite anemic, and some of them actually use the same sound, which doesn't make a lot of sense. For instance, the SMG that I have on my medic has the same firing sound as the pistol that I've got, which seems to be a major oversight. I assume they're going to change that, but there's no way those 2 guns should be using exactly the same sound asset. It would be nice to see some of the sound assets for the guns beefed up at this point. I say I do like the voice acting and there's some nice little quips. I mean, a lot of British quipping going on in that game, but the gun sounds could definitely use some work. They are not that impressive, especially compared to other games in the genre. Outside of those complaints, though, I really enjoy Dirty Bomb. So far, I've had a great deal of fun with it, and I think it's probably due to my bias towards these objective-focused FPS, and the fact that we just don't see that many attempt the multi-objective idea. And the reason for that is that you have to design your maps in a very specific way, and it takes a huge amount of work to do that. It's much, much easier to make, say, an open-style battlefield map with 5 capture points, whereas these maps are reasonably linear, but they're really, really long. You know, and you've got to build each section to be sort of a self-contained battle arena for each objective, and also give people multiple ways to achieve that objective and multiple paths to go down. That takes a lot of work, and that's probably why a lot of first-person shooters don't have that sort of setup. But Splash Damage is very good at it. They've been doing it for like 4 games now, and I think that the map design here is really good, and generally speaking, the team-focused FPS action is great. You know, the time to kill for me is just what I want. It rewards accuracy with weapons, but it also gives you that very frantic, heavily movement-focused close-range combat experience that you might enjoy from, say, an arena shooter. And there is nothing quite like the satisfaction of, say, getting a C4 down just before the timer expires, or defusing a bomb 1 second before it goes off, or indeed being the guy that revives the entire team and is the reason that you are able to push forward to victory. I love the team synergy involved here, even if the class diversity isn't exactly incredible. That's maybe something that you can criticize. You know, if you put this up against TF2, something like Team Fortress 2, each of the 9 classes is very unique in its own way. It's got its own character, it's got its own loadout, its own theme, and a wildly varying set of abilities, strengths, and weaknesses. You know, each of them has a very preset kind of role that they fit into and they excel at, and many other things they're just not as good at. In Dirty Bomb, that's less of the case. I mean, you can just go and slaughter someone as a medic if you wish. You know, you have a gun that is capable of doing that, and there isn't a vast difference in the power of weapons, you know. You're not going to be able to kill an entire team as a medic in Team Fortress 2 with the default medic gun. No, I mean, that's not going to happen. But in Dirty Bomb, you can do something like that. So the class focus is maybe more of a personal preference in this game as opposed to an absolute requirement. You know, if you've got a heavy in Team Fortress 2, the chances are you want a medic with the heavy. That's not the case here. You know, if you play as a Rhino, you don't need a medic with you. You can just go and do whatever. So you do have a little bit more leeway to just play it your way, and you won't find yourself constrained into a particular role. And even if you're playing a light character like, say, Proxy, you can still grab, say, an SMG and engage at medium range, as opposed to being stuck with a shotgun and fighting at either close range or nothing whatsoever. That would be the way that I'd describe this game, a line straddler. Now, it's very much a middle ground game, and in many ways that means it's going to appeal to quite a few people, but it also means that it doesn't necessarily have as much character and as much definition, and certainly not as much innovation as other FPS within the genre. This is a pretty safe game, you know. It's like they took Brink and they took the experience that they gained from Wolfenstein Enemy Territory and from Enemy Territory Quake Wars, and they made a pretty safe game. Now, it doesn't have vehicles, it's not as crazy as Brink is with the parkour movement system, it doesn't have a wide variety of weapons available like, say, Quake Wars did. It's a game that plays it straight down the middle, but it does it well. I'm not gonna claim that this game is going to win prizes for innovation and being a unique title. It's not. It isn't. But that doesn't mean it's not good, it doesn't mean it's not a satisfying and worthwhile experience, and it doesn't mean that it might not be worthy of your time. Because, unfortunately, there aren't that many games that do this particular style of objective-focused gameplay. And whenever one does come along, I'm generally very interested in it, and as it stands, this one's really solid right now. Innovative? No. Does it redefine the genre? No, it doesn't. Does it have any one particular feature that really stands out from the pack outside of the way that it does objectives? No, but the individual parts of the game all work really well together, and it results in a satisfying and worthwhile FPS experience that, for me, has garnered a great deal of enjoyment. If you want something that's team and objective focused, then you could definitely do worse than trying Dirty Bomb out. Now, I think it's fairly important to talk about the business model when it comes to games like this. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to dive into the business model and go in depth and talk a little bit about progression and how that actually works. That will hopefully give you a little bit more information and allow you to decide whether or not you actually want to invest some serious time. And after that, we'll come to our conclusion and also have a look at the options menu. Alright, let's talk turkey. So, business model is something you really need to consider whenever you're going into a free-to-play game, especially if it happens to be competitive in some way. Because it's very easy to screw it up and create a business model which is perceived as unfair. A lot of the times, business models are perceived as unfair, and maybe they really aren't. You know, pay-to-win is something that's been abused to the point of meaninglessness over the past few years. It describes, apparently, anything that allows you to buy anything. That's now pay to win. Well, back in the day when the term pay to win first originated, and this is the definition that I like to stick to, pay to win meant that you could directly buy power in such a way that was not reasonably acquirable by someone that wasn't paying money. So a lot of these modern free-to-play games allow pay to skip as opposed to pay to win, or pay to side grade, or pay to bling. All those kind of things. So how does Dirty Bomb work? Well, the business model is a little complicated, and it's a little bit multi-layered as well, and a lot of people have misunderstood it. This is probably due to the fact that they played an older version of it, where things were a lot more random than they are now. So this is the culprit of the random nature of this game, the equipment case. These are acquirable in-game. You get them via random drops. You get them quite often, actually. I've got 6 of them sitting in my barracks, and that was from about a day's worth of play. And you can also buy them for 1,000 in-game credits, which is very, very easy to acquire. You can get 1,000 in-game credits for your first win and your first match of the day immediately. And that's not to mention things like daily missions. So these are really easy to get. And these will drop loadouts. Now, these loadouts have varying rarities, from lead all the way up to cobalt. So lead is the lowest tier and will give you a merc loadout with 1 perk. Iron will give you 2, bronze will give you 3, then silver, gold, and cobalt, they also give you 3. They're purely cosmetic otherwise. So silver, you'll get like a silver gun and a special outfit. Gold, same thing. Cobalt, super, super rare. So these are the way that you acquire loadouts. But what is a loadout exactly? How exactly does that work? Well, here's a look at some of the loadouts. You can buy these individually. This is where the idea that the loadout thing is random and ridiculous gets thrown out the window, because you can buy any loadout in the game. So if I were to buy this arty loadout, for instance, I can buy it for real money, or I can buy it for in-game credits. And that'll tell me exactly what this has got. It has this rifle, this sidearm, this melee weapon, and these 3 perks available. So all of these loadouts can be acquired for a set amount of in-game currency. So if you see something that looks like it suits your playstyle perfectly, you can save up for it and you can buy it. But first you need to actually get the class itself. Now this is where things get a little bit strange. So this is very similar to things like League of Legends, where you can acquire a class for real money or in-game credits. And it's a little pricey. Like, I criticized Heroes of the Storm for $10 heroes. I'm going to criticize this game for $10 heroes as well. I think $10 is too much, and it does take a while to acquire them via in-game currency. Quite a bit, actually. I mean, 50,000 is quite a lot of credits. It does take a while to get it, although it's got a lot easier now that there are daily win and daily first game bonuses, as well as the 3 missions that you can play every day as well in order to gain bonus credits. So I think that should be down to 5, honestly. That, I think, would be more reasonable. Maybe cut this in half. Outside of that, once you have one of these, you get the basic loadout, which has no perks. So if I were to head over to loadouts here, we can see 3 perks on all of these guys. So for Fragger, for instance, double time, reload while sprinting, an extra magazine, and take no fall damage when landing. Basically, almost all of these perks are very, very minor in terms of their effect. None of them are going to boost your damage or boost your health, with the exception of one where you can gain up to 30 HP extra for dying repeatedly without getting a kill. So it's like a sort of minor death streak. That really is the only one. Outside of that, it's like 30% reduction to the time taken to raise or lower weapons. You can pick up and throw nearby grenades. I've never actually seen anyone do that. Reduce the damage you take from explosives by 20%. Things like increased damage to melee, but you can't get increased damage to your actual main weapons. You can get minor increases like 10% blast radius and so on and so forth, as well as the utility stuff, like you can do 3 jumps instead of 2 and all that sort of thing. So if I head over to here, you'll see that these guys, these basic loadouts, have no perks. And then if we keep moving, these are the lead loadouts, 1 perk. Iron loadouts, 2 perks. And then bronze upwards. And of course, as I said before, bronze is the highest you can go in terms of getting in-game power of some description. Everything else, it's all cosmetic, so these gold guys don't get me any extra, and in many cases, I don't use the gold loadouts because they aren't the ones that I want. Same with the silver as well. Now, yes, it's shinier, but it might not be the loadout that I'm looking for, so I do, as a result, just tend to stick to a lot of the bronze ones. So, those are the 2 layers of monetization for the most part. the purchase of classes, and of course there's a weekly rotation of free classes, and you can buy them with in-game currency, and the acquisition of loadouts to get the kind of guns that you want. The loadout card system is very unusual, and it actually reduces the amount of customization that you have in general, but simultaneously I think it probably makes the game a little bit easier to balance and also makes the game somewhat more diverse in the way that it actually operates. Now, of course, you can also acquire boosters. If we head back to the store, you can get a booster for extra credits. Pricey, in my opinion. $6 for 12 hours? Not so keen on that, but at least they do only tick down during gameplay, so there is that. I think this could definitely do with being quite a bit cheaper, and there are bundles available as well, so you can get some cheaper stuff here. The Sharpshooter bundle, for instance, that gets me these 3 classes, and it gets me 2 elite cases, which is going to unlock some loadouts. That's $16, so that's $16 for 3 heroes and 2 elite cases. So that's actually a pretty good deal in comparison to buying things individually. And as I said before, you can buy any loadout in the game this way, so you can toss all of that random nonsense with the acquisition of crates out the window. But there are a couple of other things to consider. Specifically, when it comes to loadouts, you can take your useless loadouts and you can trade them up to better ones. So let's say I really want to get some new loadouts for Rhino. Alright, so if we click that, then what we've got is the ability to craft all the way up to Cobalt, which will require me to merge gold loadout, so I obviously don't really want to do that. But if I wanted a bronze loadout, for instance, which is one that has all 3 perks. Now, it is a little bit randomized. It's going to give me random equipment and random perks, but if I want a bronze loadout, click that, and then what I can do is I can load in my spare iron cards, and you need 3 of them. I only have 2 of those right now. You can autofill, and then there's a small in-game transaction fee, which is 1,000 credits, which is very easy to acquire. And we'll just hop back for a second. We'll grab this iron one right here. There we go. Autofill, trade it up, and we end up using some of our junky cards to make better cards. So there are other ways and means to do it, and of course you can get lucky through the crate system and get a really awesome loadout that way. What would be nice is if you could actually sell these loadouts for in-game credits. That would be really great. I think that would be a good way of reducing the grind, as it were. But unfortunately you can't do that right now. So that's the business model in a nutshell. Is it fair? Does it work? Well, honestly, if you're playing a class, the basic weapons are absolutely competitive. I mean, some of the best weapons in the game are the basic weapons that you get. And with classes like, say, Rhino, for instance, you're probably not even going to be using these guns for the most part. You're going to be using your minigun, which is an ability. So you don't even need to worry too much about that. Nada's a sort of similar situation, and her basic gun is absolutely fine, but she uses her grenade launcher, which is an ability, again, so you don't need to really worry about that. I think for the most part, this game is definitely skill-orientated. There are a few perks which I think are quite advantageous, like taking 20% less damage from an explosion is quite a big deal. And there's a couple of others which are maybe a little bit more powerful as opposed to basic utility. But outside of that, it's reasonably fair, and the game is going to reward skill as opposed to buying power. You know, you really cannot buy power to any great degree. I'm not going to say that you can't buy power to some degree, because you can. Now, if you invest a bunch of money, then you're going to get a bunch of silver loadouts, which are guaranteed to have 3 perks. So yes, you're going to gain a very small edge, but it is really a very small edge. It's worth noting, absolutely, it's worth discussing, but I don't think it's a major advantage, and yes, you will be killed by people that don't have loadouts, because their guns do exactly the same damage as yours. It's a bit of an odd system, honestly. I guess they are trying to innovate to some degree. I don't think it's the worst free-to-play system ever. I certainly, in all scenarios, would prefer that you could just customize and not have to pay for any of this stuff, but unfortunately that's just not the way that modern FPS works. And if you try to sell a game like this for actual money, you get Brink, which didn't do very well. And I'm going to be one of those people that defends Brink to the death. I thought Brink was a great game, but unfortunately it didn't sell very well. It was an absolute failure. This is a free-to-play game. It's much more popular as a result because there's no barrier to entry, but the downside of free-to-play is that you're going to be laden with stuff like this. Now, it's even the same with games like TF2, which are considered to be some of the fairest games in the industry. It takes time to get the weapons and items in that as well. You don't have access to all of them from the start, but you do have access to all of the classes. I think, to me, that's probably the biggest issue with it. I think that it would have been better to emphasize the loadout system, maybe diversify it a little bit more, and even emphasize the, hey, you open a crate and get a random loadout system over selling you classes. I think it's the selling of classes that bothers me the most, particularly, say, this week. If we go to Mercs, you can hover over these Mercs and it'll tell you, hey, this is free to play this week. This week, as far as I'm aware, there are no medics available on free to play. There's 3 medics in the game right now: Sparks, Sawbones, and Aura. And none of these characters are in the free-to-play rotation, which means that you can get stuck on a team of free-to-players that hasn't got a medic, and suddenly you can be in a lot of trouble. Now, it's not like you can't win without a medic. You can, but it's a lot harder. You know, a medic is great. It would be the same thing as having a rotation that doesn't have an objective specialist, so it's much harder to defuse an objective or place an objective because objective specialists do so much faster. If I recall correctly, yeah, there is an objective specialist in the rotation this week, but there's no medic in the rotation. I think maybe they need to expand the rotation to 4 mercs and always make sure you have 1 objective specialist and 1 medic in the rotation every single time. If they do that, I think it will be less of a deal, because I haven't noticed any particular merc being drastically over or underpowered. I think they all have nice balance at the moment. There's probably quite a lot of tweaking that needs to be done, especially at the high level, but I play a wide variety of mercs, and I don't feel that any of them are really underpowered. It helps that a lot of them also share weaponry, so a lot of the guns, in fact, I'd say pretty much all of the guns are competitive to some degree, so you can gain access to those guns and everything will be fine. The only concern I think I've got is that there may be power creep at some point. Someone like Nader is a good example for this. Now, I play a Fragger quite a lot because he's got a 3-round burst rifle that I absolutely love. And his special weapon, his special ability, is the frag grenade, and you can toss 2 of these things. The thing is, Nader has a grenade launcher that can fire 5 grenades. Now, the Fragger grenades are significantly, I think they're significantly more powerful. They've got a bigger blast radius, but you can, with Nader, it's much easier to fire them over a long distance. You can fire 5 of them. They also explode on contact, which Fragger's grenades do not, as far as I'm aware. If they do, I've never seen it happen. So it's almost like Nader outmodes Fragger to some degree, which is, I think, a little bit of a weird thing. It's just because they are so similar. But it is also worth noting that they balance it out in different ways. For instance, the weapons that Fragger has available to him seem to be a bit more powerful. He also has more health, so he's got 150, whereas Nader has 110, which is fairly... That's a fairly significant difference. So maybe you could argue that Nader is power creep over Fragger, and that they're a little bit too similar in terms of character. But simultaneously, I think if you dive into them, you'll find that a character like Fragger does have access to great primaries and also has extra HP as well, so there is that to bear in mind. Plus, he can cook a grenade, which is very helpful, whereas Nader can't do that, so that's also worth bearing in mind. It's also easier, I think, to play Fragger and switch between the frag grenade and your primary, whereas with Nader, you equip the grenade launcher and you're kind of stuck with it. So if you get into a firefight and you can't use your grenade launcher, you might get into a bit more trouble. But yeah, I mean, that's something to consider. As the game gains more and more classes, there are always possibilities of overlap and power creep, and those are worth bearing in mind. It is not the worst free-to-play system I've ever seen, though. I think it's definitely got its problems. I like the fact that you can get these missions, which will allow you to earn significant amounts of in-game credits. I mean, it's usually anywhere between 500 and 750. I think you can even go up to 1,000 with the 3-star missions, so you can get quite a lot. Admittedly, you do have to play a variety of modes and maps and classes in order to actually get that in-game cash. Outside of that, you're probably going to be earning about 300 to 400 credits if you play reasonably well per match. And matches can take anywhere between, well, I mean, they can take anywhere between about 5 and 20 minutes sometimes. So yeah, it's okay. I mean, it helps that I bought the starter pack out of the gate, so I got access to a lot of the mercs immediately, and I think buying the starter pack is a good idea. I have not played it from a free-to-play perspective, although I have earned credits and used them to unlock things. Speaking of unlocking things, let's actually open a few crates to show you exactly how that works. You don't need to buy a key to open these, you just open them immediately. So, click open on that, and you get your good old Counter-Strike Go style of, hey, you're gonna get a really good thing, you're gonna get a really good thing, and lead. Yeah, that happens quite often. And of course, lead cards you get on an 80% chance, so not particularly fancy there. But like I said, you can combine these cards and level them up, and I've got a bunch of lead cards that I could very easily level up. There's another one. I'll open just the rest of these crates for you just to show you how it goes. You can skip all of that. Oh, there's an iron. That's good. And we're looking to actually get a bronze out of that, so we could do that nice and easily. In fact, let's go and do that now. Ah, and another iron. That's also great. So if we go to loadouts now and trade up, and we're looking to get something for, say, sawbones, and we want a bronze sawbones card. There we go. Add some of these irons, trade up, and hey presto, there is a 3-perk sawbones card with an SMG9, an M9 pistol, and the combat knife. It's actually not too shabby. It's alright. This one in particular is a very good perk for sawbones. I like that. Not so keen on this, and this one is almost worthless, but there you go. So yeah, that's my assessment of the business model. It's definitely not perfect. I certainly hope that they do continue to work on it, and I don't think it's 100% fair, but I've seen a hell of a lot worse. And as I said before, you can't make your bullets hit any harder, which is perhaps the most important thing. Alright, options menu. You might notice, by the way, that it's a little slow to navigate this. For some reason, I don't know why this is, the menu system before you go into the game seems a little sluggish. I don't know what's causing it, but it's been this way for quite some time in the beta, and it doesn't seem to have resolved itself anytime soon. I thought maybe it was an SLI problem, so I turned a card off, and that didn't make any difference either, so I don't know what it is. It's all perfectly fully functional, and it's not like it slows the game down. Indeed, it indicates that the frame rate is at maximum in the menu, so I really don't know what's happening there, but anyway. It's not really much of a problem. It's an aesthetic issue more so than anything. So there's actually quite a lot of customization available here. Starting off with the HUD, you can go with a dot, full, or no style crosshair. If you so desire, you can also increase or decrease the size of the crosshair and turn hit indicators on or off. And then you've got view, which takes you field of view up to 100. You can also customize whether or not sprinting is going to change the FOV or not. You can turn view bob off if you wish. I mean, I wouldn't say a lot of people, but some people get a little bit of sort of motion sickness from view bob, so they prefer this be turned off. And you can turn view arms momentum off and on, and camera animations as well. And then you got screen effects, so if you don't want lens flare, dirt, and blood, and all that stuff, you can turn it off entirely, so that's always nice. Now we move on to video, and you will see that you've got VSync on or off, as well as resolutions which go, I believe, all the way up to 4K. Yeah, actually, it even goes higher than that, as you can see. Yeah, that's a big resolution there. That's kind of scary. And you've got your aspect ratio 16:9, as well as 8:5, 5:4, 4:3. So plenty of aspect ratios available there for you. And full screen, windowed with border, and windowed without border as well. And you got your gamma slider too. If we move on to advanced, then you'll see there's a lot here. A great deal. The one thing that does confuse me, I'm not really sure why this is, with anti-aliasing, it's again anti-aliasing on or off. I'm not actually sure what kind of AA it uses, and I'm not really sure why they didn't have multiple types of AA available here. You do have presets, or you can just customize individually. Post-processing available, HQ materials, motion blur, yeah, you have that off, thank you very much. And you can turn off bloom. If you don't like depth of field, that can go as well. Ambient occlusion, as well as things like fog. And then you got light shafts and all of this lighting stuff right here. Pretty much everything you could possibly desire. I don't think there's really much missing here. I think the only thing that is probably an obvious anisotropic filtering setting. Because you've got AA. Admittedly, it would be nice if I knew what kind of AA it actually was and whether or not I could customize that to a greater degree. You know, on or off, as I mentioned in the Arkham video, isn't really good enough. I'd like to see 2x, 4x, 8x, and various kinds. I don't know where anisotropic filtering is. It may be bundled in to post-processing. That is possible, but outside of that, I don't really know why that is the case. So it would be nice if they implemented anisotropic filtering and allowed you to customize what level you wanted it at. Okay, audio. We will not save this changes. Thank you very much. Audio, separate sliders for everything. Nothing out of the ordinary here. You can also turn off things like hit beep notifications if you like. I don't like having that. I find it annoying, so I'd like to turn that off. But if you find it's useful, you can have it. Subtitles, these are not very useful because really it's a multiplayer game. There's not much story. And then you've got voice chat as well, which is enabled. And then last but by no means least, a language option. English, German, Portuguese, and French are currently the languages that are supported in the game. So overall, a pretty damn good options menu. You could also look at the controls. You probably should. Sensitivity customization If you happen to be the kind of person that does inversion on the y-axis, you can. And then you can turn off smoothing, except it's not on by default because splash damage aren't idiots. Key customization, primary and secondary, available for everything in the game, which is great. That's absolutely fantastic. And under advanced, you can also toggle things like crouch toggle or hold toggle, sprint toggle or all that kind of thing, and also toggle and hold for iron sights. You can even have sprint cancelling reload if you wish. So there's a good amount here. You know, this is a well fleshed out options menu. It is a PC game. It's not on any other platform, so I suppose this is to be expected, but for the most part, this has got pretty much everything I could ask for. So, conclusion. I'm having a lot of fun with it. I'm spending a great deal of time on it. This is really my go-to FPS at the moment, and as I've mentioned probably about 50 times already in this video, it's because of the multi-stage objectives. I like that a great deal, and it gives me those team-focused moments that I'm really looking for from an FPS like this. While it certainly is not graphically impressive and it looks a few years out of date, it does play very well. The time to kill is in that sweet spot that I really enjoy. The gunplay feels solid. The recoil is just where I want it, just in between the sort of Call of Duty style of no recoil whatsoever, bullet hosing, and Counter-Strike. And as a result, it may be a fairly familiar formula, but the pieces fit together quite nicely, and it gives a nice, complete feeling whole experience. In terms of business model, I think if I hadn't bought the starter pack, I'd probably be a little bit more annoyed by it. But that said, that's just the way that a lot of free-to-play games actually go. I don't think you can buy power in this game, although I do feel the hero classes should be cheaper. And it would be nice if they increased the number of classes available in the free rotation and ensured that you always had a medic and an objective specialist available for free. The lack of having that can cause some weeks to be more unpleasant than others, especially on unranked servers, and I'd like them to take some steps in order to resolve that. While it does have its problems, I think Dirty Bomb is a pretty damn good time at the moment, and it is one of the more promising FPS currently available on Steam if you're looking for a multiplayer experience. It has a healthy player base that seems to be growing at the moment, and in general, it's a nice team-focused experience. You can give it a try for free on Steam. My name has been TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.